Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. 10 years ago, Tom DeLay famously observed that after several years of Republican control, there was no fat left to cut in the federal budget. It was a statement that was memorable for two reasons. First, it was on its face absurd. Anybody from right to left can agree, even if we don't agree on what to cut, that there's stuff left to cut. But more importantly, it underlied a fundamental truth about how Washington, D.C. works today. For every single dime in that federal budget, while perhaps not necessary for the taxpayer, was spoken for by some Washington special interest, which would lobby intently to make sure it went forward. It's often said that Washington, D.C. is broken. Washington, D.C. is not broken. Washington, D.C. is a well-oiled machine, making sure that those powerful enough to hire a lobbyist get a tax loophole or advantage in the spending control code or a regulatory preference that helps prevent competition. The Heritage Foundation was founded 40 years ago to advance conservative public policies and educate lawmakers on what those policies are. Yet increasingly over the last 10 years, we'd walk into a member of Congress's office and find that after our educational visit, a team of lobbyists was lined up to say that while the pointy-headed guys had a good point, here's how business was actually going to work in Washington. That's why we started Heritage Action several years ago, to make sure that the voice of millions of Americans out there, millions of taxpayers, was represented in Washington, along with those well-financed special interests. Heritage Action is a big believer in a reform agenda. Earlier this year, we held our Conservative Policy Summit, where we featured bills like Mike Lee's Higher Education Reform and Opportunity Act and Chairman Jeb Hensling's Protecting American Taxpayers and Homeowners Act. But we're also big believers that the only way to have a reform agenda is to be willing to take on the sacred cows in Washington who believe in tax reform, believe in spending reform, and believe in a reform to our regulatory code. That's why we're thrilled to have our speaker here today. Jeb Hensarling is an alum of Phil Graham's office. He's the former chairman of the Republican Study Committee, former chairman of the Republican House Conference, and he currently serves as the chairman of the Financial Services Committee, where he's been unafraid to ask difficult questions, such as if private creditors are unwilling to engage in these transactions at the Export-Import Bank, it begs the question, why should the American people? At Heritage Action, we're a firm believer that more of these questions need to be asked, and it's why we're thrilled to welcome Chairman Jeb Hensarling to speak with us today.
Mike, thank you. Kind introduction. I must admit, listening to it, though, if people were hearing it for the first time, they might conclude, boy, this guy can't keep a job. Anyway, please know how thrilled I am to be speaking from a Heritage podium. The vision of Ed Fulner is alive and well today. I can think of few organizations across this great republic of ours that have done more to strengthen and invigorate the cause of liberty than the Heritage Foundation, and I'm thrilled that my former House colleague, Jim DeMint, continues to lead that fight, and although you may think about him as a senator, to me, he'll always be a House guy. Yesterday, I flew in from my home, Dallas. Some of you know that I live in Dallas. I work in Washington, D.C. And as I was getting ready for this speech, I recalled a time, probably 7 years ago, that I got stuck in Washington on a weekend. Doesn't happen often, happens occasionally. My children are used to seeing me on the weekend, so I called home my now 12-year-old, then 5-year-old. I spoke to her on the phone, and we were chatting a little bit. And she finally said, well, Daddy, what day is it? And I said, well, Claire, it's Saturday. I'm sorry I'm not home. And she said, well, that's funny, Daddy. It's Saturday here, too. The things they teach in kindergarten. So we continued to chat a little bit longer. And after a while, she said, now, Daddy, where exactly are you? And I said, well, Claire, you know, Daddy works in Washington, D.C. And then she said, Daddy, is Washington, D.C. part of America? So I would observe at a time when the federal government has clearly grown too big, too powerful, too arrogant, too expensive, and too intrusive, that an innocent child's question about Washington geography of a number of years ago remains a very serious question about Washington principle today. Because I think it seems to all that most liberals tend to equate their country with their government. They look to an enlightened, centralized, powerful Washington government to control and decide all questions and disputes. A government of the elite whose principal purpose, incidentally, is to redistribute incomes and ensure equality of outcomes. To them, Washington, D.C. is their America. But we conservatives, we know differently. The genius of America is not to be found in Washington's corridors of power and favor. No, instead, we know that the true America is in the founding and enduring bedrock principles of our republic, namely faith, limited government, unlimited opportunity, individual freedom, and of course, free enterprise. Today, more and more Americans are experiencing the failures of liberalism's Washington, from the broken promises of Obamacare to the abuses of the IRS, to an economy of shrinking paychecks and growing food stamp dependency. I believe the moment is ripe for our movement to make the case to the American people that our republic's bedrock principles are not just a matter of heritage, not just a matter of birthright, but they remain a vision for a better future for us and our children. It's a vision of growth, not austerity. It is one of hope and opportunity, not pessimism and dependence. It's a vision where honest men and women who work hard and play by the rules have an opportunity to succeed regardless of the circumstances of their birth. It's a vision that accepts no limits to how far we can go because, ladies and gentlemen, we are Americans. But before we can seize this moment, our movement must have a frank discussion and a common understanding about one of our bedrock principles, and that is the principle of free enterprise. How we think about it and how we act upon it is the subject of my talk today. First, there's probably no better discussion of the principle to be found than that which is contained within Milton Friedman's classic work, Capitalism and Freedom. And of course, I could not be more happy as to see the great professor's photo in the room when I first walked into Heritage. Now, if everyone with a Washington, D.C. address would only read Capitalism and Freedom and understand it. Now, although I haven't lost all hope, this weekend I saw my mentor, former Senator Phil Gramm, and former Texas A&M economics professor. And I recall something he once told me. I've taught economics to Aggies, and I've taught it to members of Congress. Aggies are smarter. As both an Aggie and a member of the House, I could not agree more. So whether it's termed a public-private partnership, mercantilism, industrial policy, or crony capitalism, regrettably, a great deal of economic activity that masquerades today as free enterprise is not. For the sake of our republic, our movement had best unmask the imposters and come down clearly on the side of free enterprise. Now, I must confess, I've never really liked the phrase crony capitalism. I mean, it suggests somehow that capitalism is corrupt, when the free enterprise system is actually the most fair and the most moral economic system ever devised by the mind of man. No other economic system has ever lifted more people out of poverty. There's never been a better housing program, health care program, any poverty program than the American free enterprise system. It's no other system allows people to earn their success through merit, through hard work, their creativity, their personal responsibility, and their individual initiative. No other system generates greater shared prosperity. This is the economy that most Americans want to work in. I think about it as the Main Street competitive economy. Crony capitalism is something different. With crony capitalism, success is arranged typically through government-granted favors to those who have the best political connections. Crony capitalism slows economic growth and it redistributes income. It can actually breed corruption and it undermines the legitimacy of both our state and our free enterprise economy. It's what I call the Washington insider economy. But regardless of its name, for generations it has been a threat to our conservative principles. Consider this. The same year our founders rejected tyranny for freedom by signing the Declaration of Independence, The Wealth of the Nation was published. In it, Adam Smith repeatedly warns against businesses that attempt to use political connections and influence to manipulate government into doing their bidding. Listen to Smith's words, quote, "People of the same trade seldom meet together, even for merriment and diversion. But the conversation ends in a conspiracy against the public or some contrivance to raise prices." Later, Smith gets even more direct, warning, quote, "The proposal of any new law or regulation which comes from businessmen ought always to be listened to with great precaution, and ought never to be adopted till after having been long and carefully examined, not only with the most scrupulous, but with the most suspicious attention." I sure wish someone, anyone, in the Obama administration would have had some much-needed suspicious attention to Solyndra. Smith's warnings from 2 centuries ago demonstrate that it has been along the norm for certain business interests, clearly not all, but certain business interests, to use their money, influence, and connections, to seek from government special treatment not available to others. It's why business interests are not necessarily freedom's interest, and to support business does not necessarily support free enterprise. Our nation's original patriots, they understood this. It's why they threw 3 shiploads of English tea into the Boston Harbor in 1773. They didn't do this because the Tea Act of 1773 raised taxes, but they did it because it granted tax-free status to the favored East India Company, giving it a virtual monopoly. You might say the East India Company was an early government-sponsored enterprise. Those American patriots knew cronyism when they saw it, and so must we. The Main Street competitive economy relies upon hard work, creativity, perseverance, and a uniquely American can-do optimism to create wealth and hope. The Washington insider economy, in contrast, relies on earmarks, regulatory barriers to entry, subsidies, tax preferences, and, of course, political influence. The Main Street competitive economy is exemplified by people like Wayne Williams, who lives in the 5th Congressional District of Texas, that I have the privilege of representing. After serving nearly 4 years in the Navy, Wayne came to Mesquite, Texas, got a job at the local Ford dealership. To earn some extra money, he started working, repairing cars on the weekends, and he built a reputation for good, solid work at a fair price. Like many, Wayne dreamed of someday being his own boss. So he sold his Jeep, sold his pickup truck, and his boat, that's serious to a Texan, and got a small loan from a local bank and opened his own repair shop in 1972. Today, Williams Paint and Body has 21 employees, and the business has been so successful that Wayne and his wife Evelyn are able to pass it on to their children. That's what's so great about our country, Wayne told me. I was just a poor country boy who wanted my family to have better than I had. And thanks to Wayne's hard work and the Main Street competitive economy, they do. The Washington insider economy, on the other hand, is exemplified by people like Chris Crony, the founder and former CEO of the now bankrupt Solyndra, who personally lobbied for the $535 million taxpayer-backed loan guarantee. And when it arrived, he famously sent an email to fellow Solyndra executives calling the Obama administration, quote, the Bank of Washington. Regrettably, when Washington is the bank, taxpayers usually end up losers as well. You may recall, of course, that this loan did go bad, and the so-called bank that we backed, we all had to pony up for another bailout. As Governor Romney famously told the president, you don't just pick winners and losers, you pick losers. Most Americans in the Main Street economy, they're not expecting a government bailout, and they're not looking for a subsidy, an earmark, or a tax preference, or any kind of legislative advantage. No, the good folks in the Main Street competitive economy simply want their success to depend on how hard they work in their hometowns, not who they know in Washington, D.C. Confusion between the two economies, though, has caused many to view success with suspicion. That, in turn, makes it easier for liberals to mislead our fellow countrymen with calls for bigger government in order to legislate fairness. Ladies and gentlemen, I believe for far too long conservatives have shied away from talking about fairness, seemingly content to yield this value to the left. This we do at our own peril. All Americans have the right to expect their government will treat them fairly, and that means everyone plays by the same rules. Not one set of rules for the politically well-connected and another set for everyone else. Let's look at just a few examples of how the Washington insider economy is unfair to hard-working American taxpayers in the Main Street competitive economy. The tax code. Need I say more? At 4 million words, the U.S. tax code is mind-numbingly complex. Cost Americans roughly $225 billion a year simply to comply with it. It's a disgrace. We all know it. You ask, why? Well, perhaps the biggest reason is because Washington loves to use the tax code to pick winners and losers. A host of powerful and well-connected interests, from professional sports leagues to Broadway producers to the president's own green energy cronies. They receive special privileges and preferential treatment, again, not available to hardworking shopkeepers on Main Street. Ladies and gentlemen, that's not fair. It's time for action. Let's turn the American people's frustration and resentment with our unfair tax code into a groundswell for fundamental tax reform. Today, I call upon every Republican in Congress to agree to scrap the code. We may have to tell some people on K Street no so that we can tell every American yes. And be it fair tax or flat tax, let's not just say we're for fundamental tax reform, let's actually vote on it. Subsidies. In addition to our unfair tax code, there's the Washington collection of Crony subsidies that distort our economy, impose unfair burdens on taxpayers, which is especially damaging given our nation's spending-driven debt crisis. As my friend and heritage scholar Steve Moore recently pointed out in a report, Washington pretends that business subsidies are very small, an inconsequential part of the budget. The reality is these subsidies are a large mountain of cash, to use Steve's phrase, that has amounted to more than $20 billion in direct income transfers to corporate America. On average, Steve writes, each Fortune 100 company received about $200 million in such handouts from hard-working American taxpayers. That, ladies and gentlemen, is indefensible. Then there's the Byzantine array of subsidy programs, government production quotas, import quotas, and mandatory target price programs that constitute the farm program. Now, the beneficiaries of these programs like to hide behind the image of the sainted, iconic family farmer. But in 2012, median farm household income exceeded the median U.S. household income by 34%. In fact, the median income of households associated with commercial farms was over $208,000 per year. Nowhere in America, and certainly not in the 5th District of Texas, is an income over $200,000 considered poor. In addition to the iconic family farmer, there is the iconic symbol of apple pie. American is apple pie. But isn't it embarrassing to think that baked into every American apple pie is Soviet-style sugar? This Washington Insider Sugar Program is a sweet deal for about 5,000 sugar growers whose lobby is inordinately powerful in our nation's capital. It's not such a sweet deal for the millions of hardworking taxpayers and consumers of the Main Street competitive economy who are forced to pay for it. Now, please know I proudly stand before you as the son and grandson of farmers. I grew up working on my dad's poultry farm. My very first job was cleaning out chicken houses. Incidentally, wonderful training for serving in Congress. But I can tell you, everyone worked hard on the poultry farm. There were some good times and there were some tough times. But I know firsthand, you can farm in America without taking a taxpayer subsidy. The fair way to help family farmers is to strengthen private property rights, to expand trade opportunities, to gill the death tax, and to rein in the EPA. So I call upon all Republicans in Congress. Let's make the next farm bill the last farm bill, and let's have a conservative farm program, and once and for all, let's allow all Americans the freedom to farm. Now, I'm sure you have been as troubled as I have recently to see headlines like, quote, lawmakers increase calls to bring back the bacon in spending bills, and pork spenders push to undo congressional earmark ban. It just goes to show that the price of an earmark-free Washington is eternal vigilance. As my friend Tom Coburn has said, earmarks are the gateway drug to spending addiction in Washington. Earmarks epitomize the Washington insider economy, where all too often power triumphs over merit, secrecy triumphs over transparency, and special interest triumph over the national interest. I call upon all Republicans in Congress to leave the earmark ban in place. Now let's turn to bailouts. GM, Chrysler, Wall Street, Fannie, Freddie. The Washington insider economy is turning us into a bailout nation. Few Americans have ever been interested in occupying Wall Street. They're just tired of bailing it out. And we certainly don't want a federal government that tells some that they're too big to fail and tell everybody else you're too small to matter. And ladies and gentlemen, in America, if we lose our ability to fail, we will soon lose our ability to succeed. And how is it in America that in the GM and Chrysler bailouts, the president's UAW allies, they make out just fine, but thousands of secured creditors were left holding the bag? That's the Washington insider economy at work. And again, no discussion of bailouts would be complete without mentioning the mother of all bailouts, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. In their heyday, few equaled their Washington influence, and Washington, in turn, rewarded them with virtual monopolies. These virtual monopolies allowed them to privatize their profits and socialize their losses. And we know how the story ends. We all know Fannie and Freddie were at the epicenter of the financial crisis. It's time to end the boom-bust bailout cycle in the United States of America. And I say this to my friends in the housing industry. I think I may have a few left. The best housing program in America. It's not a subsidy, and it's not a federal guarantee. It's a growing economy. That's the housing program that works. It's time for the Republican Party to live up to its pledge to end the reign of Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, to end the almost $200 billion bailout, and that's exactly what the PATH Act does. And I certainly want to thank all those who are associated with the Heritage Foundation for their good work to help further this legislation. The PATH Act, the acronym stands for Protecting American Taxpayers and Homeowners. It's passed the House Financial Services Committee, and it will end these crony corrupted mortgage giants once and for all. It is time for action. I call on every Republican in Congress to support the PATH Act today. The last issue I wish to discuss with you today is the federally chartered Export-Import Bank, whose authorization ends at the end of September. Now, given that I suspect fewer than 1 out of 1,000 have ever heard of the bank, and given that relative to the other 10,000 federal programs, agencies, and departments, it's of relative modest size, it kind of begs the question, why is this an important debate? Why is this authorization an important matter? It's an important matter because I do not know of a better poster child of the Washington insider economy and corporate welfare than the Export-Import Bank. Its demise would clearly be one of the few achievable victories for the Main Street competitive economy left in this Congress. I believe it is a defining issue for our party and a defining issue for our movement. The reauthorization debate clearly goes to the heart of the question. Which economy do we believe in? Most taxpayers, I think, although they may not have heard of the EXIM Bank, would be surprised to learn that a government-run bank takes their hard-earned taxpayer money and lends it out to the likes of China and Russia, nations that openly challenge our economic and security interests. It also lends their money to oil-rich countries like Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. It even lends taxpayer money to the likes of the Congo, which has a demonstrated history of human rights abuses. I doubt too many taxpayers would be proud of this, much less believe it to be wise and fair. As many of you know, these loans and credit guarantees to foreign entities arguably serve the purpose of supporting U.S. jobs through the expansion of U.S. exports. Supporters of the Ex-Im Bank push forward Miss Jenny Fulton of Miss Jenny's Pickles as the face of the bank. I have never met Miss Fulton, but I have no doubt she's a fine lady, a good businesswoman. I bet you she exports a good pickle. But when it comes to dollars and not pickles, Miss Fulton and small business owners like her are a very small part of Ex-Im. The real beneficiaries, the true face of Ex-Im, are the multi-billion-dollar corporations like GE, Ford, and of course, Boeing. That's because more than 60% of Ex-Im's financing benefited just 10 large corporations last year. Roughly half of the bank's book of business supports Boeing's aircraft exports alone, earning the bank its common nickname, quote, the Bank of Boeing. Does anyone doubt that these multi-billion-dollar companies would do just fine without the Export-Import Bank's corporate welfare? Now, don't get me wrong, I like and respect these companies, and I especially like and respect the jobs that they create. But I think most hardworking taxpayers would be scratching their heads, if not throwing a fit, at the prospect of their government using their money to support a boutique export credit agency for some of the largest and deep-pocketed corporate titans in America. Now, again, although few Americans have ever heard of the Export-Import Bank, I suspect the bank will remedy that situation very soon as we get closer to the end of their authorization. I have no doubt you'll hear from Ex-Im, we create jobs. And you know what? They've got numbers, photo opportunities, and testimonials. But here's the truth. Ex-Im is not showing you both sides of the ledger. Rather than actually creating net new jobs, Ex-Im simply shifts production from one sector of the economy to another. That's precisely why the Government Accountability Office has reported that government programs like the Export-Import Bank, quote, may largely shift production among sectors within the economy rather than raise the overall level of employment in the economy. Or, as Professor Donald Boudreaux of George Mason University neatly summed it up, quote, at best, the Ex-Im Bank creates jobs in export industries by destroying jobs in non-export industries. If you were to ask Delta Airlines and other U.S. air carriers, they would point out that Ex-Im's loans to foreign airlines have killed as many as 7,500 airline jobs, domestic American airline jobs, because the bank subsidizes their foreign competitors. Caterpillar was a recent beneficiary of Ex-Im's taxpayer financing that went to an iron ore mining project controlled by Australia's single richest citizen. And an American iron ore company called Cliffs Natural Resources said it'll no longer be able to effectively compete with its Australian competitors due to the Ex-Im subsidy. This is how jobs are created? Another American competitor feeling the sting of Ex-Im is Valero Energy in my native Texas. They employ over 10,000. Ex-Im is lending $641 million to a Turkish company to build a new petroleum refinery in Turkey. Ex-Im's actions, quote, jeopardize U.S. refining jobs and undermine the strength of the U.S. refining infrastructure. So wrote Valero's CEO to the chairman of Ex-Im. So again, Ex-Im's claims about creating jobs are dubious at best if you'll take a look at both sides of the jobs ledger. And speaking of accounting, if you will also hear from the Ex-Im Bank, we make money for the taxpayers. Well, if that were the only test, perhaps we should go out as a government and purchase a profitable hamburger chain, perhaps McDonald's, perhaps Jack in the Box, and rename it Uncle Sam's Burgers and Fries. Of course, if run by the federal government, it would assuredly not remain profitable. And more importantly, I do not believe that comports with our vision of the proper role of government in a free society. Besides, the Ex-Im Bank's supposed profitable operation is suspect. If Ex-Im were to use fair value accounting, as the Congressional Budget Office recommends, then there's an argument that it might actually show a $200 million loss instead of a gain. Using fair value accounting, we'd see that the bank's programs operate at a significantly higher subsidy rate than it currently shows on its budget. This means that the programs cost the American taxpayers far more to operate and delivers far less revenue as a return than the bank claims. Does this remind anybody of the accounting gimmicks that the cronies running Fannie and Freddie used to mask their true financial picture of their GSEs back in the late 90s and early 2000s? Think about it. And even if the Export-Import Bank was making money, as it claims, you know what? Fannie and Freddie made money until they didn't. The National Flood Insurance Program made money until it didn't. Social Security used to make money until it didn't. Need I go on? History teaches us that sooner or later, every government insurance and guarantee program, almost without fail, will fail. The next argument you will hear from XM is we fill in financing gaps. What gaps? Over 98% of all American exports are financed without the Export-Import Bank. In other words, almost every other American exporter is perfectly capable of securing financing without forcing the taxpayer to be an involuntary partner in the deal. Does XM mean that they're providing financing where the private sector won't? Doesn't that kind of beg the question, if the private sector won't undertake the risk, why is XM forcing the taxpayer to do so? The next argument about XM comes directly from President Obama, who said, quote, "As long as our global competitors are providing financing for their exports, we've got to do the same." That kind of sounds like the very same argument I hear from my 10-year-old and my 12-year-old. Everyone else is doing it, Daddy. I've never found that argument to be terribly persuasive. If other countries want to subsidize the products they sell us, maybe we should thank them instead of copying them. Most taxpayers aren't interested in being on the hook for an export subsidy arms race with the rest of the world. Besides, the truth is that only a little more than 1/3 of the Export-Import Bank's book of business is used to compete with our foreign competitors' export subsidies. Now, here's an interesting one as the reauthorization debate begins to heat up. Some of the bank's beneficiaries and supporters are running ads claiming that President Ronald Reagan was one of the bank's biggest fans. Well, ladies and gentlemen, the truth is President Reagan tried three times to zero out the bank's direct lending program, and he actually succeeded in reducing its authorization by 50%. On XM, listen to the Gipper, quote, "Is it fair to ask taxpayers to help pay billions for export subsidies to a handful of America's biggest corporations?" And the resounding answer from the audience was no. President Reagan would be proud. Perhaps what's most disturbing, though, about the Export-Import Bank is its political lending, that which is ideologically based and that which is crony-based. The bank is mandated to support specific sectors of political lending. It has a green energy quota. It permits almost no assistance for coal projects. It has a mandate to specifically support exports going to sub-Saharan Africa. It has a small business mandate as well. In other words, as Milton Friedman said, XM substitutes the judgment of bureaucrats for that of the marketplace. And then there's the bank's more crony-based political lending. Again, last year, more than 60% of XM's financing benefited just 10 mega corporations that have a strong political presence in this town. Recently, another example, Abengoa, a Spanish multinational corporation, received a $33 million export-import loan, while former Energy Secretary Bill Richardson simultaneously sat on the Spanish company's advisory board and XM's as well. Ladies and gentlemen, some things just don't pass the smell test. And of course, XM guaranteed $10 million in loans to benefit the politically favored Solyndra. I'm reminded that Apple Computers got its start in a garage. As I read the history, it almost appears that Solyndra may have gotten its start at an Obama fundraiser. Now, I have no doubt that an overwhelming number of Democrats will support reauthorization of the Export-Import Bank. They're only too happy to allocate credit in our economy as part of a political process. Democrats are always happy to subsidize corporate America as long as they can also regulate it, control it, and reward their friends. Let them take ownership of the Washington insider economy, but not us. Let us proudly stand for fairness and for merit. Let us proudly stand for the Main Street competitive economy. Today, I call upon every Republican in Congress to simply let XM expire. Let the American taxpayer exit XM. The smart and fair way to promote American exports is with a conservative agenda. Fundamental tax reform, strong free trade agreements, a freeze on most regulations, and American energy independence led with projects like the Keystone Pipeline. As you can see, the war against cronyism, Washington is a target-rich environment. And although I have not run out of examples, I'm sure I am running out of time and perhaps your patience. So what's the cost of the Export-Import Bank and the rest of the Washington insider economy? Academic studies suggest perhaps as high as 7 to 22% of GDP is the financial cost for the U.S. economy. That means the average annual cost can range from $1 trillion up to $3.5 trillion. But I would offer the opinion there's even a far greater cost. The true cost is that too many Americans now believe that the system in America is rigged, that it's unfair, that free enterprise really doesn't work or can't work for them. You know how the argument goes. The left says this is a 99% versus 1% country. The greed of the few have impoverished the many. And if you have become successful, surely you have done it through luck, larceny, or political influence. To them, success is something to be suspect, something to be vilified. We have become very familiar with their narrative. Our narrative must be that free enterprise is fair. Only free enterprise is moral. Only free enterprise is based on merit. Only free enterprise is empowering of the common man and woman. It's the only economic citizen that, again, frees ordinary people, like my constituent Wayne Williams, to achieve the extraordinary result of building his own successful small business and leaving it to his children. Now, another such person is Christian Yorgay. He escaped America from communist Romania by swimming across the Danube River in the 80s. When he arrived in the U.S., the immigration officer asked him, "Why are you here?" He replied with one of the few English words he knew: freedom. To make ends meet and learn English, he took a job as a New York City limo driver. Today, over a quarter century later, he is a Silicon Valley CEO whose company recently raised $13 million from investors for its cloud-based analytics platform. Ladies and gentlemen, that's America, and that's the Main Street competitive economy. Quote, "The most amazing thing that America has given me is the gift of freedom to build something from nothing," he said. Freedom. That's what this debate is about. And ladies and gentlemen, isn't that what almost every debate in the federal city is really about at its core? It's a debate over whether we should continue to be the free republic that shook the world in 1776, or whether we are destined to become a European-style social welfare state of the 21st century. The answer to that question lies collectively in the hands of our movement and our party. It is our opportunity and it is our imperative to reform the corporate welfare state. It is right. It is necessary. For then and only then will we have the moral authority and the popular support to reform the social welfare state. And that is the entire point of my talk today. So this is a call for action for Republicans and conservatives today to reject the Washington insider economy. Let the Democrats embrace it. Let's embrace the Main Street competitive economy, its fairness, its empowerment, its morality, and when we do, America's future will be one of unparalleled freedom and opportunity and growth. A future where all children will be bound only by the size of their dreams. A future where you succeed because of your abilities and ambition, not because of who you know in Washington. At the end of the day, this future is not in my hands as one lone member of the United States House of Representatives. It is in the hands of all the citizens of this great republic. We all remember the quote, as Jefferson famously wrote Madison, "The people are the only sure reliance for the preservation of liberty." Let us all leave this hall today and be about the preservation of liberty. Thank you very much. Apparently, I just volunteered to take a few questions. Yes, sir.
Good afternoon. Mr. Chairman, in your talk, you mentioned about global competitiveness, and then, particularly in the XM category, the free market might dictate that the jobs that are here in the United States, because of attractive things like financing, because we haven't fixed our tax code, haven't reduced our regulatory burden, hadn't reduced the cost of litigation that makes making things in the U.S. more expensive than other places. What do you think the implications will be when you can source things anywhere? Do you think that those jobs for manufacturing will go to places that keep their XM bank?
Well, again, I think roughly a third, a little over the third of XM banks goes to meet supposedly competitive subsidies of others who export. I would say that there are still great advantages for businesses to be in America. I'm happy to see that there is a resurgence of manufacturing. And again, over 98% of U.S. exporters finance without the benefit of export-import. I'm not sure, again, that two wrongs make a right. I'm also not sure how I tell Wayne Williams in Mesquite, Texas, because he doesn't do paint and body work for people in China or Russia. Why is it that the federal government will subsidize a small business that exports but won't subsidize a business that is serving the Main Street economy in Mesquite, Texas? Again, I want us to be the envy of the nation. As chairman of the House Financial Services Committee, it is the goal of our committee to create the deepest, most liquid, most innovative, transparent capital markets the world has ever known. I want America to have every competitive advantage, but the competitive advantage comes from the freedom, the hard work, the ingenuity of the American people. Again, I respect those who have a different opinion. I have a number of friends on the other side of this debate. It's kind of why we have these debates. But again, I don't want to force the taxpayers to be engaged in a subsidy arms race. I don't think that's the way we help our export industry. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I apologize, I'm going to bring the question a little more domestic for a moment. A big part of your speech was freedom. And looking at it from a domestic standpoint, how much of a threat on freedom do you see Operation Choke Point right now as it's developing and cracking down on domestic businesses across the board?
Well, the short answer is a lot. I think one of the great threats to our freedom is how much power has been yielded from the people to their government, and then how much power has been yielded from Article 1 of the Constitution to Article 2, and then to the bowels of the bureaucracy of Article 2 that are not transparent, are not accountable. As a member of the House, my job contract comes up for renewal every 2 years. If people don't like me, they have the opportunity to vote against me. I still hold town hall meetings where I assure you my constituents are quite good at holding me accountable. But that's not the truth in something like, or the case, it's something like Operation Choke Point. Clearly, had Congress wanted this done, Congress would have acted. And it's a reminder of what a threat it is to freedom to have a president who has a phone, a pen, but seemingly doesn't have a copy of the Constitution. So the short answer is a lot. So you got the short answer and the long answer. Yes, sir, and back. Okay. It better be a good one because I was informed it's the last one.
Okay, I'll try. All right, just a very simple question. Are you at all considering running for speaker?
I was happy to see Johnny Manziel drafted by the Cleveland Browns. Listen, I'm flattered when people ask the question. I am not, it's not something I've aspired to. It's not something I'm thinking about. It's not something I am working on. I see no reason whatsoever why it is in the interest of the Republican Party or the conservative movement to really be thinking about leadership races. No, I haven't been Sherman-esque. Again, I'm not sure there's any opportunity I want to foreclose. I have a small property in rural East Texas in Henderson County. I may want to run for county commissioner in Henderson County one day. It's not something I'm thinking about. It's not something I'm working on at the moment. Again, I don't find that to be in our best interest. I just get up in the morning trying to figure out what I can do to make a difference for the cause of freedom. I will say this, again, I'm not going to be Sherman-esque. I don't know why I want to be Sherman-esque. And I'm not a betting man. I would anticipate, although there are no guarantees in life, that I would once again have the opportunity to serve as chairman of the House Financial Services Committee, and that would please me to no end. But again, I will get up every morning trying to figure out what I can do to make a difference for the cause of freedom, because I love this country dearly, and as the father of a 10-year-old and a 12-year-old, I'm not indifferent as to their future. Again, I just want to thank everybody for being here today. Mike, thank you, and thank you for all the good patriotic work done at the Heritage Foundation. Thank you very much.